All right, looks like we're set up. Back to OBS. Took me a second to get it. If you don't mind, just type in the chat, say something real nice, and let me know if you can hear me, and then we can kind of get rolling for this Thursday evening. Live from Chelsea, Michigan, home of the Bulldogs. Looks like we got streams up. Dr. Marcico, thank you. Fairzuck, bright and early over there. Mona, howdy. Megan, hello. All right. Greg, hi, good to see you. We're going to have a good crew tonight, I think. I'll just give everybody a second to roll in. Jack, good to see you. Josh, good to see you too. Tiger Vision is here. Susan B. Coming in hot from Texas. All right. Ooh, we added some more decor. Yep. So we've added now Claire's photo of Lake Superior. I think I would call this a sunset. I think if you're from Marquette, it's famous. I don't know if that's true or not. Probably making that up. All right. All right. Big Erm, Denise, Matheson, Wildfire, Eileen. Got the jersey tans going. I love it. I want that. And then Michelle, D, off and running. Okay. Amanda, welcome everybody. Okay, so today we are talking about this question, and the reason I framed it this way is there a cure for POTS is because that is like the pervasive question. Hello, Corey. Hello, Irene McBean. But this is kind of like, is there a cure for POTS is the question, right? So that's what everybody asks. I don't know if it's the the appropriate framing, to be honest, because cure has a wild connotation to it from everyone. Irene, yep, I can see your comments. I said hello earlier. We're going to get rocking and rolling, okay? Here we go. So, yeah, so the reason we're framing it up this way, talking about is there a cure, is because that's the question people are asking. And we have to define what cure is, because it's an ephemeral word in the sense that most things that people talk about as being a problem, like what does cure mean? So the actual term for cure is centers around the word healing. And I think that's really the right thing, because I think that at the end of the day, your body is kind of the thing that does the healing. And the degree to which it heals is really what we're after. So we're looking at like maximal level of healing, and cure for a lot of people can mean like return to normalcy. And normalcy is kind of the win. So let's look at that. Sorry, I'm trying to read and talk at the same time. I'm not good at that. So just checking everybody out. A lot of stuff coming in. But okay, so I'm gonna kind of step away. It's good to see everybody. I see Nomad Over Normal, Baby B, Wildfire, Amanda. Yeah, I think this is like a reasonable question. And when I interpret it, you guys can differ with me if you want. I'm open to debate on this topic. But when I think about good to see you, Cheryl. Okay, so sorry. When I think about curing, what I'm thinking about is like, what does that mean to someone how can you make that actionable? How can you make it functional for people? And so to me, that definition of cure is thinking about it in terms of healing. And that healing is kind of like, how do I just get back to how do I be able to do, it's not even get back to, it's can I be able to do XYZ without feeling ABC? And for most people, that's kind of what the target is. And that may be different for different people and in terms of what they would expect. And that's okay. But for a lot of people, it's worth kind of aiming high when you think about healing. And I think there's a reticence to aim high because there is a fear that you might miss. And that fear comes with like a dissolved amount of hope. And what I'm gathering from conversations online, and I've had a lot of help from Chris and a lot of help from Genia in really understanding this, is that a lot of what comes with this sort of pessimism around healing is that it's actually like a layer deeper than that. And that pessimism around healing is kind of more like a fear around it, a fear around not finding an answer. And for some people, it almost feels like, and I could be wrong, and I don't think necessarily a lot of people here might resonate with that, but like a fear to miss or a fear that they will get their hopes up and be dashed. And I think that's probably happened to a lot of people. And so that's not really the aim of the conversation, is to get your hopes up and get you riled up and get you excited. The hope is to just kind of step back for a second and say, what do we know? Rather than jumping to the immediate, like, well, there's no cure, you're going to be doing this for the rest of your life, and away you go, because that immediately creates a picture in your head of whatever bad you're feeling right now, your brain just like pushing that forward into the future in a way that feels vastly overwhelming. And that's a pretty common sentiment. And then you kind of got to work back from there. So what I would like to do today is actually spend a couple minutes talking about like things that we actually know to be true that do not kind of put us in that realm of things aren't curable. And if you can do that, it does open up a way to have some hope, but not hope for hope's sake, not hope just to kind of like, give people respite from feeling exhausted and afraid. The hope is actually more of a strategic hope, tactical hope. Like, how can we start to make tactical moves in folks where we can actually start moving them toward healing? And so I'd like to really use that frame of healing, because healing is a thing that we kind of like consciously don't have a ton of control over, right? That's a thing that our body does for us as a gift that we maybe don't even deserve. It's like a very graceful gift that we have, and it's a blessing. So then the question is, like, how do we do things that would allow us to do that process better? In my experience, I've been doing like this type of work, it's like 16 years, so it's been a little bit. In my experience is there are actually a number of things that can push people toward that, okay? And get us toward a place where we can start to move in a tactical way toward a solution. So, Mathieson asked a good question. It says, and I'm sorry, I know I'm missing a bunch backed up here, but it's just the one that popped in at the bottom. It says, when you set an aim high, do you mean to have no symptoms at all? Or is it more of a realistic expectation to always have some symptoms? And that's like the core question, I think, and I'll answer it directly. So I think a lot of people will have the experience that there can be no symptoms, particularly in relationship to autonomic symptoms. And that can feel really big and can feel like, whoa, especially if you spent any time in a chat room, any time like in a support group. It doesn't tend to, I think it is a wonderful tool because it allows people to just feel like they got somebody that is on their same page, that has felt what they felt. And that's validating. But I think like validating is one stop on the train. Like that's the first feeling that feels good. But then after that, we have to decide like what can we do to go beyond validated and find things that have a utility. And if we find things that have a utility, they're useful, then how can we start to actually allow your body to be able to produce energy in a way that allows you to be able to do more? And if you can do more, can you do it without feeling all kind of like the terrible goop that comes with that exertion? And I think that framework for how to move through it is the way. And I don't know that the answer is the same for everybody, to be honest. In all the people that I get to see and visit with, some people have different levels of motivation than others, which matters. Some people have different levels of support than others, which, sorry to say, kind of does matter. It's not the only excuse, it's not the only thing. Like, there are people that don't have a lot of support that have motivation like crazy and they're able to do it. But I would say across the board, my experiences have been that there is like an amount of effort that is involved to be able to do it, because it's kind of like an effort that has to be put in to be able to build capacity. Like, there's an amount of building that has to be done in the course of healing. Just like, if I always talk about like ankle sprains, and if you sprain your ankle and you're trying to get back to running, it's really hard to get back to running by just like starting running again on a swollen, painful ankle. Like, that is really hard to do. It hurts a lot, swells up the ankle, things don't heal as well. And I think sometimes, like, when we try to get back into like everyday function after being sick for a while, we try to do it like we're trying to go get back into running, when in reality we have to do some things that help rehab the weak spots. And that's really hard to do if you don't know where to aim. If you don't know what is the weak spot, it's really hard to be able to say, I'm going to focus on that weak spot. So I think that key factor matters a whole lot in chronic illness writ large, but specifically in autonomic disorders, specifically in concussion. I'm having like a scratchy voice at the moment, so give me 1 second. There we go. Okay. Oh man, I see so many comments that I am way behind on. Okay. But what I'm going to do is I'm not going to be able to get to them all right now. Ginny, I think you're trying to share. Can you put them in? I don't have private comments here. I'm going to have to try to just go back and catch them as they come. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up this little PowerPoint here. It's not long. I'm going to go through some things that are pretty tactical. And the reason they're tactical is that they are things that we know to be true in terms of how do we help the autonomic system heal. Okay? And I think that's the part to focus on, because Matheson just kind of came in with another one here and said, are there any physical factors? You've got good timing tonight. I like that. Any physical factors that could mean that someone can't fully recover from POTS? And that's the right question. It's a heterogeneous syndrome. What does that mean? It means that I don't know how many people are on the stream. There's quite a few. But of all the people on the stream, most of you probably don't have the same problem. And I think that's actually really great, because what it means is you've all arrived here from a different way. You might all have POTS, you might all have tachycardia, that's fine, but it doesn't mean it all came the same way. And if it doesn't come the same way, it means that there's going to be different causality for how do we get here. Okay, so there's different causality, then we have to figure out how to solve each problem individually, which is great. There are some people that will have physical disabilities in a way that will prevent them from having a full life. And that's really hard to hear and it's really hard to say, but there are some people that will experience that. But I also think there's a whole lot of people that when we evaluate them, there's no like material block from having a permanent problem that we can detect, which is pretty cool. And in that case, we want to push people toward the upper bounds of what they're capable of. I don't like it when we put limits on people where we come from the outside and we put an external limit on what somebody's capable of, because I don't think I've ever seen, like, you can't know what people will look like. I have cases from people that I know from a decade ago that if you would have talked to them then, like, they would have been happy to just like be able to get out of bed, right? To be able to feed themselves, not feed themselves, like, I guess feed themselves when we think about ADLs, but like cook for themselves, care for themselves. And then a decade later, the conversation is more around like, a full life. I'm working too much. I got kids. just being able to manage a life kind of like other people typically do. So I guess that's my next point, is that I don't like hearing when people say, when someone tells somebody else it's permanent, or when somebody gives somebody else a limitation, that it's external, because you can't know it to be true. And I've just seen that too many times. So that's just like a little word of encouragement. I want to start here. Let's talk about it. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, trying to get organized. Actually, I'm getting distracted a lot by trying to keep up with the comments, and so many people saying hi, and I'm really thankful for that. So it like just catches me. But here we go. So I think to define it, my perception is a lot of times we look at it like this, where a cure in our mind is like an instant fix. These are things that like we could do with a medication, a surgery, and we can just feel better now. And that is a lovely idea, but I think the reality is for most people that it's just not going to be the way it goes at this point. Otherwise, you don't find yourself on a conversation with me like this. So we have to think about it differently. And I think about it as this restoration of function as being the goal. Because if your body works better, it does all these magical things on the other end. So if it can run cleaner, then it's able to use energy more effectively. And if it's able to use energy more effectively, then it's able to use it for kind of like higher level tasks. And if we can do that, then it allows us to be able to kind of step in what we're capable of from a bandwidth perspective. We can do more stuff. And then typically, when we think about symptoms or pain or discomfort or nausea or dizziness, these are all signals that there's like a circuit that is flipped and things aren't working right. And it's an indicator for us. So if we're trying to go through life and we're getting all of these indicators and warning bells that are just going like crazy, then that's a signal that something's not working right, and we need to step back and figure out what it is. So this overlap of being able to kind of look at it from an energy perspective in terms of what is our capacity and what can we do, overlaid with how do we feel when we do it, tell us about that underlying component of function. So what we are focused on in our team, in the group of people that we're trying to serve, is we're focusing on symptom resolution through normalization of autonomic function. So we're not focusing on symptom resolution by trying to directly suppress a symptom. We're trying to focus on it as how do we leverage function in the system as a way to reduce those switches from firing and from causing that sensation of abnormality. The conversation that we're going to have tonight is mostly in these cases that are kind of in our orbit the most, and they tend to circle around people that have post-viral types of presentations, post-concussive or post-injury. These can not just be concussion, but whiplash, head injury, these types of problems. And then problems that are just kind of generally around this concept of neurological dysfunction. And the reason I kind of lump things in neurological dysfunction is there are a lot of sources in the world that will look at these things through different lenses. That's just the lens that we learn through. So a lot of people will note that they really think about things through an immune lens, or they might think about things through like an energy or a metabolism lens. But when you boil those down, though, they still kind of come back to these control systems. So I really think it's worth opening in the mind a little bit and starting to think about control systems in terms of these general themes around autonomic activities. Okay. Oh man, I just popped onto the chat again. So many people. Yowza. Okay. First of all, good to see you all. Leslie, nice to see you. Christy Lee, love having you. Wildfire's here. Ooh, Karma, Haley, Rob. Rob's awesome. Raj Paul, I see the questions, but I'm going to have to get to them in a minute. Okay. Munya. Heather. Okay. Okay. Actually, I'm gonna actually touch on this one from Fairzuck. He knows the chat game. He's been following Martin too long. He's heard me say that neuroplasticity can happen fast. So why, for a lot of people, even when doing the right thing, does it take a long time to recover? I think there's two main functions of that. Number one is you've got different things that recover at different times. When we talk about neuroplasticity, that does have the capacity of moving very quickly. But then the output systems can be systems that are muscular, which don't move as fast. They can be things that operate through different organ systems or different hormone systems that don't operate as fast. And then there's a component of capacity, and you're just building strength. So the ability to create a pathway is quick, but then to continue to use it to make it strong is another component of that we have to account for. And the third component of that is just healing as a function. So one of the things I think is really kind of important to talk about is I am used to as well. So I'm not saying anybody else is different, but you kind of get used to this idea of like being sick and then like recovering and then you move along. And like that's the way you want to do it. But when you find yourself in a more of a chronic state of not doing great, what you may find is that like there's this like capacity building thing that has to happen that comes from healing. So for example, I think about some of you that have seen me recently, I've told this story. So we were lucky enough to be able to take a trip to Mexico over the kind of the spring holiday. And so I took my kids and we were hanging out at the water park, having a great time. And then we find a water slide. So I'm dad and I'm about to show them how to have a great time on a water slide. So I go flying down the water slide and immediately go down, my toes catch the water, and I slam my knee into the bottom of the pool, right? And I nailed it. I did it great. And so it swelled up real big. I shaved all the skin off the top. It was wonderful. And it's just like a surface thing. It's a wound on my skin, a bruise on my knee, swelling in my joint. Didn't end up fracturing my patella, I don't think, although jury's still kind of out on that. But like even today, that happened in whatever month it was, February, March. But even if you look today, like I still have kind of a wound on my knee that's healing up and it's still sore and my knee's still a little bit swollen. And that's just kind of part of healing. And even though I'm in a place now where I can function pretty well, it is still obviously healing. And so that's part of it that we don't get to control so much is the fact that like stuff just takes some time to heal. And a lot of times, I'm skipping ahead, but if we don't give things the ability or the substrate to be able to heal quickly, it slows way down. And then there's this lag time of like just getting the system to run well enough to do the healing part. And that part also very much matters. So you'll hear me talk more and more about cerebral perfusion and getting blood flow to the brain. And that's like a common refrain in my life. So one part is like we're trying to solve that problem for people. And then some people, we will get it to where that blood flow is approaching normal again. And they're like, but I don't feel great right now. And it's like, yeah, of course not. All we did is we just started getting like just everybody's normal level of blood flow to the system. Now we've got to let it work. We've got to get sleep going. We've got to be able to do some recovery and let the system run so that it can heal itself. And I think that part, while isn't like the rapid fix, is really important. So you're trying to get to a place where you're supporting healing. Most of you guys know that like sleep becomes a big thing, right? So whether you're having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, disrupted sleep, you wake up feeling gross. Even when you're healthy, everybody knows like if you go for a while and you don't have enough sleep, you don't feel very well, and that can last for time and it can make you sick. So if you have a long period of time where recovery is just not full speed, then we have to be able to like get better to the point where we're then allowing our body to heal and then allowing it to build capacity. So there's this like work through that people have to go through in order to do that. And that is why what we talked about earlier, that kind of motivation and support helps, because it helps you just kind of keep going. And it's nice because you'll see like the little things improving over time, but where you see the big steps is actually looking backwards, where it's like, man, I have actually in the last month, I haven't woken up in the middle of the night at all. Or I've been really noticing that like those big episodes of like breathing, like I'm having problems breathing, those attacks aren't I'm not getting those as much. And so like you just kind of keep moving. And I think that's the difficult part, because when you're in the pits of it, you just want to get it done. And for some people, just like waking up one day might not, and feeling great might not be in the cards. But like over time, there's a high probability that like you can feel better. So it's like taking that short term and then pushing that time expectancy out and saying like, well, if I can do this for a day, that might not solve this. But if I can do it for a year, the chances I feel better are amazing. So it's just a way to frame that. Sorry, that was a long one. Bradford says, story time. I get it. But, that's my knee, and I wanted to share it and whine a little bit about it. So there you go. Okay, moving along. Whoa, that's fun. Got to click this one. Okay, so here's one of the ways that has been proven that helps people in POTS, and it's this cardiovascular reconditioning part. A lot of people know about this through Levine protocols, through modified CHOP protocols, and it's just like basic ideas around trying to get some fitness back in your life. So in this particular one, they're looking at some different variables here. You're welcome. I put the link in here so you guys can see what the study is. But we can see improvements in upright heart rate, barrel reflex sensitivity, heart rate variability. And this was just done with simple recumbent aerobic exercise for 3 months, and then adding salt, fluid, and compression, right? And what we actually find is like this is like the men's health version. When I was a kid, like you didn't have the internet to turn to so much, so like if you wanted to work out, you'd go buy like a Muscle and Fitness or a Men's Health, and then they'd have workouts in there and you do those, right? But they're not tailored to you, and they're not particularly like well defined, but they're general things that are good for people. So you can imagine if you take this idea that is, okay, aerobic exercise, and then you bear that out even more, that's just the tip of the iceberg. So in this case, aerobic exercise is actually not really the right way to think about it. The right way to think about this here is actually like autonomic fitness, or in some cases even like vascular fitness. And so we're not even thinking about it in terms of like, I need to get my heart rate up, I need to get my muscles sore. We're thinking about it in terms of like, I need to get more reps of my cerebral blood vessels to be able to expand and contract so they can get better at it. I need to get more reps of being able to cause the dilation in the peripheral arterial system. I need to get more reps in the muscles in my legs being able to activate mitochondria and produce energy, and therefore off-gas CO2 back into the system, right? So there's like all these more nuanced ways that we can think about it. We can measure it differently. So you guys that have been in the clinic, like we don't even use heart rate and like Berg scores to be able to monitor people. We're more focused on actually looking at CO2 levels and looking at the way that people's eyes move and the way that your otolith is treating your head movement when you're moving, and how your neck contributes to the problems. And so we're looking at different variables. So actually when you start looking at like these simple exercise things that can improve for people, and you say if we can dial that in more and more, then there becomes even a bigger window to be able to serve. And this is from 2011. So we've known this for a super long time. But why might people run into, so like the objection to this would be like, yeah, but I did the Levine protocol, I did the CHOP protocol, and it was just horrendous, and I didn't feel better. I might have got like a little better at doing it, but I kept having to start over at week 1, right? Those of you out there, you know what I mean. And then you say like, oh, well, maybe I'm not the type of person that is the right solution for, or this isn't the right way to do it for me. Does that make sense? So this is like the biggest blanket general prescription that you could possibly have for everybody that's coming to this problem with lots of different problems, and we're trying to solve a symptom of fatigability. Okay, so let's think about this a little bit, and then say, like, how could I wire this up for me? And the way that you would think about it is to say, well, what am I exercising for? Am I exercising because I have a low aerobic capacity? Cool. Like, how are we measuring that? And then the salt and fluids and compression, the volume expansion. Do I need to have volume expansion? Is that my problem? Or when I'm exercising, maybe I'm actually in a head position where I'm kind of like choking off arterial supply, or I'm giving myself like a cervical myelopathy where I'm compressing my spinal cord, or maybe my baroreceptor system just doesn't work. So trying to crank out higher velocities it already is out kicking my coverage. So you can see how there's a wide gap of people that this may not help, but it's not to say that applying exercise in a different way, a more targeted way, might be really useful in those cases. Okay, let's keep going. So another thing to consider would be thinking about like this. This is another thing that we know works. So the baroreflex sensitivity. So we have, these are basically that they read our blood pressure. They're little nuggets in our arterial system that allow us to know what the pressure is every single beat of your life, and they help keep it targeted. So we know that baroreflex dysfunction is central to POTS. But I'd be willing to guess that most people that have POTS have not really done a big investigation into baroreflex dysfunction to know, maybe you know that it's a thing, but you don't know how to check for it. You don't know how to test it. If you're looking at autonomic findings, we want to know, what does a deep breathing test look like? What does a Valsalva test look like? How does that relate to a tilt test? Specifically, when we look at cerebral blood flow, CO2 levels, how does that correlate to what we see with pupillary responses in GI effects, and what does their heart sound right, and how do they breathe, etc. So like, there isn't like a quick way I can give you a DIY at home to check baroreflex functions, but they are a thing that is central to POTS. And if you're really hunting to try to find a solution, you should look into this. So next part, cardiovascular exercises increase baroreflex gain. They can. So the more blood that I pump through a vessel, the more we rely on the baroreflex to work. If it's already not working very well, though, we may want to actually decrease the gain and make it a little bit easier for those baroreceptors to create a sensory barrage so that they can transmit their signal to the brainstem and then get an output. So we might actually find that cardiovascular exercise overshoots their capacity. You can measure that. You can find out. And then you can figure out, well, how do I measure, or how do I exercise in a way that I am able to generate that baroreflex response? You can know that too, because you can look at how the outputs of blood flow through the body and through the brain. So it's actually a beautiful thing. Thirdly, here we look at vagal tone restoration. I don't like to use those words, but that was the words that are used in the paper, so we're going to use them here. But the vagal system is the big sensory input from your gut, from your heart, from your lungs. So if we find that those signals are impaired, then it makes it really hard for our brain to adjust to whatever's going on. So we're probably more likely to have gut findings. We're probably more likely to have difficulty breathing or managing oxygen ratios. We may have disruptions in the way that our heart beats under different conditions, right? But in both of these, and this is from 23, this is Klein et al., and I had to chop this one up because it was kind of a long in the abstract, but reduced baroreceptor sensitivity was present in people that had POTS. Cardiovascular exercise was increasing baroreflex sensitivity. So you can imagine that is like the general term. If we make that more specific, it becomes more applicable to an individual. So we know that it works across big swaths of people when it's just kind of thrown at them randomly. Imagine what we could do if we could aim it and target it toward a person's actual underlying problem. I'm going to stop for a second. When I'm in this mode, I can't see the comments, so I'm just going to breeze through them real quick. I won't answer all of them just yet, but just to kind of see where we're at. Ooh-wee, you guys are busy tonight. Okay. So, Dr. Jinya, I know you shared with me, or you have a shared document with me on this, but I don't know where it's shared to. Let me check real quick. Give me just a moment, taking a little breather. Thanks for commenting and just playing along. I know I'm not able to get to all of these just yet, but hopefully we can make some headway soon on that. And hopefully we can just have a little bit of fun. It's good to see you guys. I like being able to, I kind of look forward to seeing everybody on Thursday night. It's become a ritual. Hang on, I'm trying to log into so we got in this rhythm where Dr. Ginny was helping me by hunting down the questions and then putting them into a document for me. Here we go. Here it is. And then I can kind of look at the chats, and that seems to work okay. Woo! You guys have a lot of questions. Oh, man. I'm never going to catch up. Okay, I'm going to do my best, though. I'm actually going to take this one that's second to the top here because it's from Lacey, and she says, I don't believe you can cure POTS because you have dysautonomia, which isn't curable, but you can put it into remission. Many POTS patients have positive ANA or autoimmune markers. I've seen... Okay, so having positive ANA, I'm going to address this really quickly because I think it's important, because people look at autoimmunity as this scarlet letter you have to carry forever. Now, to a degree, you'll always have immune markers because your body made them and they're there to serve. But you have to consider, what is the the output of that system? The correlation between autonomic systems and immune systems are very high because they come from the same generators in the brain. They get the same sensory signals into the insular cortex. They are going to have similar output mechanisms through the brain and through the hypothalamus. And we can get into the details of what that looks like. But if you're someone that tends to have hyperactive types of symptoms, there's a higher probability you're also going to have hyperactivity in the immune system. You're going to respond to everything. You're going to have, immunity issues. You're probably going to have allergy type issues. Welcome to the world, MCAS. You're probably going to notice that you're just kind of sensitive to the whole world. And that's true. And then we look at, on the other hand of that, we see people that have hypoactive responses that might pass out more. They have low blood pressure, low heart rates, and they may find that they get sick really easy because their immune system doesn't catch things as well. And so it's kind of helpful to put it in that framework and then realize you're kind of solving the same problem both ways. So when you look at these in terms of immune markers, you see a lot of people that show autoimmune markers. Everybody has autoimmune markers to a degree because they're just kind of part of the natural course. So I don't think I would look at it as remission, because remission implies that it's going to come back as severe or worse than it was before. And I just haven't seen that be true in my own observations. But it also is a way, it's a way of looking at it that is relatively defeatist, because we want to look at it in terms of functional outcomes. And if we can say if I can get my body to work better and if I can do more stuff, that's pretty awesome. And then if I can also feel better doing more stuff, then that's kind of what life looks like. It's what a healthy life looks like. And everybody's we're all not going to make it out of here alive. So everybody's kind of running toward the end. So I don't think remission is a particularly useful way to look at it because of the implication that it will come back. So that's just my take on that. You don't have to believe me, and you can argue with me about it if you'd like. But I don't think it's a useful way to approach it. Okay. Cameron got a capnograph. Gonna use it and then gonna put it to work. Proud of you. Okay, Ginia, I didn't manage this well to start with, and it has gotten away from me here. All right. Okay, so a quick one here is working out is helpful with hyperactive POTS or hyperadrenal POTS. I don't like talking about it that way, but I was an athlete, but I can barely work out. Exactly right. So I think the point here is that just working out writ large is too much. It's running on a sprained ankle. We want to figure out what is the weak spot and how do we train at the point of failure of the weak spot. So if I'm a marathon runner and I got a sprained ankle, chances are I'm going to be icing the ankle and I'm going to be doing some really light, non-painful range of motion first, which doesn't feel anything like running. You're not going to burn nearly as many calories. You're not nearly as active, but you can get an ankle that works again, and then you can get back to running again. Cool? Okay. Okay. Hang on one sec. Okay, so I'm going to get back into this real quick. So another way that we can think about things that we know that work in the autonomic system that have been around forever is this idea of cerebral perfusion. I think my personal opinion on this currently, based on what we know, is that this has been probably the most overlooked component of all orthostatic intolerances for a long time. I've been kind of screaming it from the rooftop for years. I'm hoarse, but more and more articles are starting to come out that are identifying this and calling attention to it. And I think that is wonderful. I don't think this is everybody's core problem, but I think it's a lot of people's core problem, and it's worth measuring for, and it's worth paying attention to. So we know that, I mean, this is just in this one paper that was published out of, I think, Adeline down in Australia. This is like super recent, and they're finding that even in their SPECT scans, which you're laying down in, that cerebral blood flow is reduced in 50 to 60% of those patients before they ever even do a tilt. So even when they're supine. And turns out that just by being able to work on tilt training and reintegration, they can improve blood flow, right? So the quote we have here is abnormal cerebral blood flow was seen in 61% of people that did not differ by their POTS triggers, which means people that had largely different symptomatic expression, right? They could feel like their problems were worse for different reasons. The correlated factor was the fact that they all still had low cerebral blood flow, even while resting. And the places that were affected the most, get this, everybody, pay attention, listen up. Canadians in the back, you know who you are, that are always here, never comment, never make me feel special. Okay. They tend to affect the lateral prefrontal cortices and the somatosensory cortices. That's gigantically huge, because when you think about the lateral prefrontal cortex, that's basically the whole part of you that is like your executive function, the part that you identify as you, your thinking brain has to hub through the lateral prefrontal cortices. And they get their inputs from the sensory motor cortex. So the whole picture or the schema of you, and I've talked about this in a previous live looking at body schema, that whole picture that you generate of yourself, like if you close your eyes and you can imagine where your hands are and your legs are and where your head is, but you can also kind of imagine where things are in the room. That picture that's constantly being updated and generated in your brain doesn't just happen automatically. It has to be processed through all these sensors, be driven up to the somatosensory cortex, go through sensory motor processing that allows us to be able to interpret what in the heck is going on in the world through all of our different sensory inputs. And then it binds that to that executive function component, and then we are able to do things. And those do things may be like have thoughts. How many of you have noticed like brain fog is a thing? Being able to have adequate memory is a thing. Working memory, being able to think, being able to have normal emotions where you're not feeling lethargic or grumpy, right? These are things that we do, activities. And then we tie that in with reflexive activities or things that we don't have to think about, and then volitional things as well. All of this stuff has to rely on sensory motor cortex and the prefrontal cortex to be able to generate these things. So guess what? If we steal blood out of those areas, they're probably not going to work great, and we're going to have these types of symptoms. So people with cognitive dysfunction, even when laying down, supine, contribute to reduced quality of life. Okay? And then we go forward and we can look at Van Kampen, and even more so with Peter Novak. Reduced orthostatic, or standing up, cerebral blood flow is the key unifying feature of this is hypocapnic cerebral hypoperfusion. and then POTS, and being able to talk about how these things are all like integrated in this problem of we are not getting enough blood flow to the brain when we stand up, and sometimes even when we're laying down. This is an excellent, excellent place to start to make a dent in people's quality of life. I'm going to pause there and say goodnight to these kiddos who are getting back from Sounds and Sights. Looks like we got some balloons. We got a little poodle. That's very cute. And somebody was also playing in the makeup today.
Daddy, look at my poodle's tail. Hey, I can't see.
Well, that's because I'm in the way.
Mm-hmm. Oh, my poodle.
You guys have fun?
Yeah.
Nice.
I have to put so I can hug you.
Okay. Where'd you get Slinky?
Oh, we got at Sounds and Sights.
Wow. What a night. What a night.
And we also got balloons. You see mine has a pop tail?
It does, yeah.
A what? Oh yeah, mine has a string tail. Let's see.
See what camera?
Yes. Mine has a string tail.
Very nice. Okay, you want to say goodnight to everybody, and then you gotta get a shower probably. You probably stink.
Oh.
Okay, say goodnight to everybody. We gotta get back to talking about pots. I'm a little behind tonight. We got a lot of stuff to talk about, a lot of great questions coming in, and I don't know if I'm gonna be able to answer them all. Love you too, babe. Love you, babe.
We'll leave you in peace.
Okay.
We'll leave you in peace.
Okay. Love you.
Love you.
Okay, thank you very much for letting me take a minute with the kiddos. And then I'll get back to ranting on my soapbox about cerebral perfusion. So this is, I mean, we just kind of like every single, thank you guys for saying they are beautiful. I'm very lucky. Chrissy Lee says it's the best intermission. Hey, by the way, Chrissy Lee, I have someone who I was sending over to you to take a look at your Christy Lee performance, by the way. I might be punching your numbers up because I talk to everybody about that. I think it's super cool. You should tell everybody about it because I love it. Anyway, we'll leave you in peace. I know they have no intention of ever leaving in peace, so just know that. Okay. Okay. A lot of good questions, so I'm going to try to get to them. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make here, guys, is like this is the thing that we know is like at the core for a lot of people of what's going on. And at least a problem with healing, like if you can't get blood in your head, it's super hard to heal, and it's just even like within the tissue of your brain. But then you carry that in order out further, and then you realize like it's hard for your brain to just like control all of the stuff it's got going on. So we got to start with just like getting it to a place of like balance, so you're not just constantly falling off the treadmill, but like how do we just start to get you to a place of like equanimity, just like balance. And then from there, let that system run and get stronger again. And so we can't assume that just like as we start to get it going, that it will be stronger again. There's like a twofold process. And Leslie asked a good question about that. She said, for those that are able to get blood flow from very low to 100% in the clinic, are those good odds for a full recovery over time? To me, yeah. That's been my experience because we're kind of eliminating those barriers of healing. We're just trying to we're the bouncer, just pulling off all the things that are just beating you down and just trying to let your body get into position to heal. So I think that's like a really good outcome for people. So I like that. Okay. And then obviously, so then let's talk really quick about like, how do we think about rehabilitation for perfusion? It's going to get long. I apologize. So in terms of perfusion, how do we think about that? We think about, well, what's causing the underlying? And for some people, like, let's go through what we got this week. So we're going to have problems with some people with autoregulation. And these can be the ones that are really common after viral injuries, especially. We got like a 35-year history one. with us here. And you think about that happening over a long term, like if you spend decades just like on the cusp of not getting enough blood flow in your head, if you're just always there all the time, you can imagine that you're just always on that razor's edge between like I'm up and moving around, it might not be great, but I'm up and doing stuff, to like just something small pulling you back below the water line and then you're down again, right? So like if you're constantly living in that choked off state, that's like you're just right on that thin line. And then you compare that to people that are pretty healthy. They have all of this gray area where like they can eat some food that they shouldn't eat, and they can maybe stay up later than they should and like treat their body worse than they should, or have a cigarette now and again, and like lay on the couch and do nothing. But like they still have this space between their like, I'm gonna boom fall into a full episode. They've got all this space, and they've got this system that is able to quickly recover and charge back up to normal, so they don't go into the depths like some other people do, especially when we think about ME/CFS and things that are more chronic. And so it can be like common to be jealous and be like, they can do all this stuff and I have to watch everything so carefully and I'm on a razor's edge all the time. But then you watch them like pull their blood flow relationship back up, and you start to see the lights turn on, and then over time you see that gray space start to come up and get a little bigger and a little bit bigger, and they have more resilience. I can go out and do things with my friends now and it's not killing me. I can like be a little lenient with my diet, a little ice cream every now and again, maybe a little piece of pizza. I notice that one bad night's sleep doesn't knock me out for a month. So you just kind of like see that like buffer zone start to creep up again, and that's what we're after. So I just saw a note. Oh, everybody's saying, Mona's got finals tomorrow. Everybody give her a shout out. A pluses hopefully next week. Oh my goodness, I got Canadians in the front row. I've done it. It's only taken me months of live streaming every single Thursday. And I finally got some Canadians in the front row commenting in the comments. This is a big night for me. I don't know if you guys realize that, but it's pretty great. It's amazing. Okay, good luck to Mona as well. Okay, so that's on cerebral perfusion. We were talking about like what sorts of things can you do. So we talked about autoregulation. In some cases, it may be as much as just helping people make transitions from laying down to being upright. Right, that can be a simple basic one. It's like, can you just like grade it out so people, maybe I can't be good at here to here, but I can be good at here to here, and then how do I build that back up? The case I'm thinking about, what we noticed was we wanted to actually target those frontal areas. So one of the lowest, like the least taxing ways that we can do that is we're actually using stimulus through the limbs, followed by specific eye movements that are targeted toward individual sides of the brain. So we use these saccadic eye movements, and we target them toward individual sides of the brain so that we can actually pull that supply in, because we knew in that case that they were able to generate normal neurovascular coupling. So when we have them do those tasks, it actually pulled blood supply up. So we just put them in a more advantageous position and allow them to be able to get better at controlling that blood flow into the brain, and then make it a little bit more difficult and more difficult and more difficult and more difficult until we can get upright doing those same tasks. And now we start to create the window, right? In other cases, we may find that hypocapnia is really a problem, where they're just not generating enough CO2 in the system. We want to do a little bit deeper look into pH of the system, electrolyte balance, like what's going on in the bloods. And then we work on how do we start to consider, if we wanted to get more CO2 to be able to persist in the system, do we need to change breathing? Do we need to look at like breathing rates as a function of the reflexes in the chemoreceptors of the lungs and in the brain? And then moving out from there. And sometimes one of the best ways to do that is actually doing like super low grade exercise that may be something like, supine cycling, or it may be something where it's actually passive movements of the limbs or movements of the eye or vestibular stimulations that really take that exercise level even down lower targeting the areas that are going to help them be able to modulate those chemoreceptors. Other ways to think about are related to, well, we'll talk about those in a second. We'll talk about the vestibular system here. Let's make that transition. Let's check that out. So the vestibular system is like wildly important in terms of how we should think about delivering blood flow to the brain, because in order to know that you've changed from laying down to sitting up, we've got to have some sensors that detect where our head is relative to the rest of our body. And that helps us to control the reflexes that shift us from having, like, you know, when you're laying down, let me use this bottle here. If I'm laying down, the fluid's going to tend to accumulate toward the bottom. So it's going to kind of hang out there. If this is my head, it's way easier to pump blood in there because I don't have to pump it upstream. But as soon as I start to move that, I want to detect that my head is going up so that I can start to constrict all these vessels and start to push that blood up. It'd be like squeezing this bottle to push the blood up and keep it in the head. And so we have to do that. We have to have sensors that detect it, and we have to have motor outputs that execute it. And our vestibular system is really strongly at the core of that. So there's this really cool work that was done by Yates. He did the lion's share of this, and then published a big paper back in 2014. We know that the otolith organs drive these really fast or short latency sympathetic regulations. This is called the vestibulosympathetic reflex. A lot of times it's interesting because when we talk about the sympathetic system, there's this like knee-jerk reaction to say, like, we don't want it to be high, right? Like, oh, it's too much, because that's like the fight or flight thing. But actually, for most of you that are dealing with problems with tachycardia that are secondary to like blood flow problems, you actually want your sympathetic system to work really well. You want it to be really fast, and you want it to be really accurate. And that's what you see here, because the sympathetic system is what's going to be in charge of making sure your vessels constrict appropriately to push the blood into your head and not let it drop toward your feet. So even though a lot of times we worry about that as like the causal component, or it's working too much, the reason it's working too much is because actually the limb that's going to the heart is having to crank out like mad because the brain didn't get the memo that we're not getting enough blood flow. So there was a miss somewhere in the system. So what's really cool, and this is getting in the weeds a little bit, but those of you that will nerd out with me a little, hang out, because this is that vestibulosympathetic reflex over here I'm highlighting with my cursor. The cool part is it will start to stimulate that change to push blood up into your head before the pressure sensors in your neck can detect that there's a change. And that makes sense because you don't want to have all the blood exiting your head before your body kicks in to do something about it. You'll notice that when people feel good, they can lay down, stand up, they don't notice any change at all. Well, why? Why is because as they go to even think about standing up, in their prefrontal cortex, right, that's running good because it's getting perfused. And then that's going to kind of like send the next domino toward the vestibular system, and it's going to say, yep, we are going. And then we've already started the process of pushing more blood to the head before we even get upright. And so in a lot of our POTS folks, or our orthostatic intolerance folks, this system is too slow or doesn't kick in right, and we see that we're left holding the bag of just not being able to get blood to the head. And this will look differently in different people. So sometimes you'll do a tilt test, and right away they set down to a low rate, and it just gets stuck there. Like cerebral perfusion's at 70, and it just gets stuck. Sometimes you'll see people where it drops hard in the beginning, but then over time it gradually starts to catch up again. And these would be examples of long latency responses. It took too long to react, right? So we know that this system's got to be impaired. Well, we don't know it from this, but we know it from other things. And there are other times where somebody actually may have a really nice latency, and when they tilt up right away, boom, that cerebral flow is high, blood pressure's great, heart rate's kicking in strong. But then over time, it starts to drop out, and maybe the perfusion drops out first, and that starts punching the heart rate up, and then the blood pressure starts to drop, and then we start to get toward passing out, right? So there's different ways that this can look in different people, depending on how responsive those different areas of the brain are. So it's really useful to understand not just like, do I have POTS? Do I have orthostatic hypotension? That part, it doesn't really matter as much as knowing why it's happening in the first place. Like, am I having a latency in this otolithic response? If so, we're going to do otolithic exercises, try to make that stronger. And if we can make it more sensitive, then we can see that it will become sensitive to being able to execute this vestibulosympathetic reflex. And like magic, it turns back on. It's not really magic, but it's just a thing that starts to work when it does it normally. And these are all different little kind of little snippets out of papers. I've got 100 papers that look just like this. They're beautiful. So here it says vestibular loss impairs cardiovascular tonic responses to changes in body orientation with respect to gravity. So if your vestibular system is affected, it's going to affect the ability to control your heart and its relationship to standing upright. That's what it says. The vestibular system exerts a significant influence on sympathetic outflow to muscles. So these short latency vestibulosympathetic reflexes exist in humans. That's from 2017. That's kind of just a little duh. And then this other one, so bilaterally deficient OVEMP, which is basically looking at how your eyes and your inner ear and your neck work together when you stimulate them. When you send a little sensory pulse in there, does it activate the reflex? And we found that when we have problems here, it can be associated with problems with orthostatic hypotension, where we don't generate enough sympathetic outflow. The difference between that and somebody with POTS is that they're able to compensate by saying, let's crank the heart rate up and use that cardiac reflex to be able to compensate for the orthostatic hypotension. Super cool. So then we think about vestibular therapy. And we know that those things that we just talked about are very responsive to vestibular rehab. So in this kind of study that's here, this is from Shaw 2019, and they have an update in 2025, where they notice also there's this weird thing. A lot of people with POTS also seem to have something that looks like a vestibular migraine, like in something around 40% of cases. And then it turns out hey, if we just do basic rehab, like nondescript, just throw a little rehab at them, they tend to get better. And they tend to not only improve the dizziness, but they also improve autonomic stability, right? So we know that we can change the autonomic system, the integrity of the autonomic system, by doing very basic, simple, probably not very good vestibular rehab, which is amazing. So then you look at this, where it says sensory motor mismatch, like visual vestibular discordance, exacerbates instability and exacerbates dysautonomia. Different types of rehab can integrate ocular motor, vestibular, and proprioceptive retraining, and then we see these outcomes. Right, and that's just on a super basic level. So based on this, it's really hard to look at it and say yeah, people might be going through some really hard stuff, but in each of these, there's a silver lining that shows there are exercises that you can do that capture the neuroplasticity that allows your brain to calibrate itself. And it could do that and let itself heal. And you're kind of in business for a lot of people. And I recognize that this is going to be varying degrees for different people. But what I want to point out is that it's not just nonsense. This is these are things that people have known for a super long time, but it's just taken an incredibly long time to start to match them to the underlying dysfunction in people with orthostatic intolerance. And that's what we're trying to do, is just say let's match you to the actual underlying problem that serves you, so you don't have to run around to all these different places and just hope you eventually land on the one that sticks for you. Okay, let's check in here. Let me back up here. Holy mackerel. Okay, so a lot of people are identifying with we need to talk about more of the vestibular stuff, because Jessica is pretty pumped about that. Christian was asking about if we save everything. Yeah, this will live here forever. I don't care. I want it to be a library for everyone. Yeah, so what I love about the vestibular system, hear me out on this, is that in most cases, it's not like a broken receptor where it's just like gone and it's never going to work again. A lot of times, now, can that happen? Yes, don't get me wrong. But also, your brain, let me back up. So it's really cool. So everybody's vestibular system, hunker in with me for a moment, is basically like the size of a Cheerio, and it lives like right in here, like right in behind your ears. But it's built, it's like a cave that's carved into your skull, into your temporal bone. And because of that, when it's carved in there, you have all of these different little canals. They're like little hula hoops, like little tiny, tiny hula hoops. And they are oriented at different angles. You got a set on each side. So like you have these ones that are facing anterior, that it's supposed to be like 45 degrees, like up and toward that side. And then you got a posterior one that's opposite. So it's like down in 45 degrees to the opposite side. And then you have matching ones on the other side. It's like the equal and opposite. So the posterior one over here is like right in line with the anterior one on the other side. So it's like a little mohawk sort of deal. And the same thing on the other side. And then you have these ones that are in the horizontal canal as well. So that when you're moving your head, you can detect which way they're moving depending on how fluid is rotating through those canals, which is pretty cool. But again, they're like super, super, super tiny because they are like carved out of your temporal bone, right? So everybody knows that when you are born, we want those babies to be at 45 so we can detect movement correct. But our faces don't look the same. Like all of us have heads that are shaped differently. We can have little lopsided heads, little crooked heads. We lay flat on our back too long as a baby. We got flat head. And so like these things remember, they're built into the skull and they have to be processed based on those angles. So if you get one that's a little cockeyed relative to the others, does that mean you're just going to wander around the world forever dizzy, just spinning around? No, that like doesn't work. We would be, screwed from the start. So our brain can actually, when we are little, it can use the information from our eyes and from our neck as we're rolling that little ball of cartilage around, and it can actually, it like calibrates our inner ear. So like however yours is built, whatever like bend you got in yours, your brain figures out that like, okay, well, these are off, but we know how to match them. Like this means vertical. And then it can take, and when you move your head around, it can do the math inside your brainstem to be able to deal with that, which is so stinking cool. So it's like always updating. But what that means is if I bang my head or something and I mess with the signal that comes from one and it, rattles it around and then I'm dizzy for a little bit, that brainstem works like crazy to reorganize what neutral is for you again. And it does that by using your eyes and that signal from your ear and the signal from your neck and your body and your feet. And then it reorganizes it and it like resets it, recalibrates it. It's like a scale, you put your little bowl on and then you recalibrate it back to zero and the tearing response. And then you like put your food in there and then you can tear it again, right? And it resets it. And like that's what this midline area, the neural integrator, does inside of our brainstem. So it's always there, just like ready to fix it. And what's cool is that in these cases, when we're looking at these otolithic and so like the otolith is a little bit different. Let me back up. The otolith is the same idea, but they're shaped more like two little, I don't know, like flying saucers, like little spoons, like this, one on each side. So there's one like this, and then we flip it over and there's one like this, one in each ear. And those help us detect where we're holding our head. So not just when we're moving, but like where are we right now? And the position of those is helped to be able to, we can figure that out as well based on that neural integrator. So when we back up and we look at these tests we just look at, that otolithic system is the main driver of the sympathetic output. And so if we have problems in the way that that's being perceived, then it doesn't mean that we have necessarily a problem in the actual like structure, but it can be because we get damage in the area that's supposed to be updating it all the time. And when we get problems in that updating area, then it bleeds out into those sympathetic discharges. It bleeds out into the processing of baroreceptor activities. So it's this like widely connected thing, but it's so trainable. But for people that get injuries, especially like a whiplash injury or a concussion, we may find that it's just like not quite able to calibrate it. But again, if we use our broken or our sprained ankle analogy, if we slow everything down and let it catch its calibration again, and like we just slow it down, let it find itself, then it can start to rebuild that strength. Most of you that have been in vestibular rehab are kind of doing it the opposite way, where it's like, look at that A over there, and let's just start whipping your head around. But that's like running on the sprained ankle. You're not gaining any ground because you're missing every turn. But if you can like slow it down and make the whole thing be really accurate, then all of a sudden your brain's like, oh, that's where we were. And then it can start to extrapolate that back out and build it up again, which is just amazing. And you guys can see that I get excited talking about this because it's one of the coolest things I've ever learned about. And in the application of practice in my life, it has been the most remarkable thing to watch, is to watch people do these like really simple, like silly, slow head movements and like put their life back together, just doing something silly like that. So, yeah, so like the little nuggets in there are, number one, you should know if there's something in the vestibular system that's affected, we need to go after that like an attack dog and try to get it stronger again. But the way to do that feels paradoxical because a lot of times it's actually slowing it way, way down and letting that vestibular system be able to kind of catch up and recalibrate itself. And it usually means going way, way lower in the dose than you think you need to and focusing on being extremely accurate. Extremely accurate. Because you think about it, my inner ear is all sensory. It has no motor output. Like your ear doesn't there's no movement that happens from your inner ear, right? It is a sensor that helps you detect like what I should do with my head and eye movements. So it's like being in a submarine. It doesn't know how well it's doing because it's just living inside of your skull, sending out signals. It has to be calibrated to another signal in order to know how well it's doing. So your eyes or your neck, the proprioceptors, can help tell you if that system is accurate or not, and then it can start to calibrate itself relative to the motion of your eyes into your head. So it's super, super cool. I know I spent a lot of time on that, but I think it gives a ton of value for anybody in the room as a way to like step back and say, have I really examined this system? And if I have I approached it in a way that fit my capacity level? And if not, how can I start to go through that process as well? Just like we think about with hypoperfusion. Okay? Cool. Okay, so here's kind of like my conclusion on it. We talked about it through the realm of thinking about it in terms of exercise. But like, how do you dial in exercise and don't be lame and just like try to brute force it? Okay. We talked about it through the realm of thinking about perfusion and baroreceptor activity. Without that, without adequate perfusion to the brain, it's very hard to produce energy. You need glucose and oxygen in order to use any neuron in the body. If we're having a slow delivery of those two things, it's going to be really hard to function, but it's also going to be really hard to heal. And if I want to get function, I got to first have the capacity to heal so that I can start to build capacity of function. Okay? We talked about it through the nature of talking about just a simple reflex. There's tons of other ones, but I thought I was going to be quick and like really fast, but apparently I didn't do that. But we just talked briefly about the vestibular system because it is so tied to the positioning of where my head is relative to my heart, that if it doesn't work very well, I'm going to skew my whole system's ability to be able to send blood appropriately, and I'm going to have a failure of delivering it to my head, which yields the other problems we talk about. But in all of these things, there has been established guidelines for like, hey, if we work on these things for people, we dose it right, we make it stronger, we do that over time, it seems to really help. So I guess I'm kind of almost making like a little plea, maybe a call to action. I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know what it is, but I'm just kind of asking to consider if you're here, and you may not find that I'm the right fit for you, but also, so what? Pursue things that have these like protocol based, mechanistically guided strategies, right? So I wrote that up here. Protocol based, meaning like we have an idea of how to approach it. It doesn't have to be like everybody does the same protocol. It's just more in terms of like there is a strategy to be implemented based on the underlying mechanisms. And these are just a few. And that there are things that we can execute over time to help people, number one, build up the substrate to heal, and then help build capacity from that. So that is my sort of talk about how I think about POTS and a cure. To be frank, my experience is that I do think it is curable. And when I mean curable, I mean people can go through a season of their life where this is the worst thing they've ever gone through. And then I've seen people work very hard. They've worked very hard and then found themselves in a position where they no longer experience symptoms for an extended period of time. And that's not blowing smoke at anybody, but it's also not a guarantee that everybody will achieve it because it is kind of hard and you got to do it right and know what you're aiming at. So like those are the caveats. It's a very real way to say it. But that is like a thing worth aiming for. So try to find people that are willing to measure things accordingly. I gave you a great place to start. Let's understand, like, hey, there's a huge percentage of people that are going through autonomic problems that don't get adequate cerebral blood flow. That's probably a good place to start. Like, see where you're at. And then it's worth probably seeing what the function is in the vestibular system and how the baroreceptors are working. And if you know those things, like, you can go a long way just from that, because you can then turn that around and turn that into actionable strategies that help you make them stronger, as long as you get the dosing adequate for you. So there we go. I'll open it up. I'll take some questions. I know I'm way behind. I know you guys have tons of great questions, and I don't mean to not answer them, but this is something that I wanted to say into the world so that people can think about it, chew on it, figure out where their questions are, and we can elevate our conversation. So I'll open the floor, take a look around, take a breath. Okay. So I see Patricia's on metformin of 3 weeks. Probably had a blood sugar problem there. There you go. Glad that works for you. Okay. Good. Oh, thanks for saying that, Sarah. Makes a ton of sense, the vestibular information. I really hope that that helps dial it in and we keep running forward. Let's see. This is a good question for where we're at in our conversation. It says, how do you feel, this is Jessica, by the way. Jessica says, how do you feel about prism glasses fitting into this picture since getting COVID and then all of these downstream problems? I had a doc prescribe prisms and try to help convergence, headaches, dizziness. So yeah, for this group, I would say the analogy is that prism glasses are kind of like compression stockings for your eyes, meaning if I have a problem in the vestibular system, the output to my eyes is going to be changed, especially if I have a problem with my otoliths, which help me detect gravity. So detect the earth kind of pulling down on us. That's not really what happens, but feels that way. Our translations that go back and forth, side to side, up and down. Like all of these are controlled by the otolithic sensors. That's how we feel all of those things. But we don't have to be moving. So we're just sitting here. I can tell the difference between my head being like this and my head being like this, even though there is no movement. And the reason we can do that is because we have otoliths, and then we have neck receptors to back that up, and then we have visual receptors to back it up. So, but if I have a problem with the processing of the information from the otoliths, then what's going to happen is the position of my eyes is going to change a little bit. And that maybe they change in this plane, where they kind of like start to move around here, or they may change in this plane. But if they change in this plane, they're likely changing with a little bit of a twist as well. So the eyes will kind of move in a different plane and they may twist. And because of that, your ability to see one spot clearly can be affected. So sometimes instead of like addressing the underlying problem here, or maybe we try to address it in its max capacity, then we can put a prism over top and it bends the light in a way that it makes it feel like your eyes are at the same level when they're straight ahead. Now, when I move my neck, that's going to change. When I tilt my head, that's going to change. But generally speaking, if I'm sitting upright and I'm not moving a lot, then I'll be able to like kind of trick my eyes into thinking they're in the right position. And that can be really helpful as to give people respite, to like not have their eyes fighting them all the time. And then the other thing to consider is like to what degree that correlates with what you want to do in resolving the underlying. You may find that fixing the eyes may not fix the vestibular sympathetic reflex, and you might have some underlying symptoms that still exist. And then you have to figure out like, how do I marry these two things together to be able to push myself forward. So I hope that helps. Thanks for saying that, Jessica. Never had eye issues before. Really interesting. Definitely nerding out here. Yeah. And then sometimes we'll put them on because the eyes will get weak because we're not getting blood flow to the brain, and then they'll start to like, kind of cross like you see people do as they get tired, and then people will pop that on, and then to try to get a little bit of relief. But you're kind of always weighing out like the relief level versus the underlying problem and how well those two things interface with each other. Cool. I see Guy Ritchie. Where's that at? Hey guys, good to see you, man. How is perfusion measured? So the way that I measure it is I measure it using the transcranial Doppler ultrasound. And the reason we do it that way is so I can look at people in different positions. So I can compare laying down versus standing up. I can compare the difference between like if I sit neutral or if I turn my head, right? If I do any of these things, I can compare that to like if I put my arms over my head, and I can see if that changes the ability to get blood flow to the brain. And then there's also the ability to use a SPECT scan, but with a SPECT scan, you're kind of limited because you're in an imaging chamber and you're going to be in one position. Still a very useful test, but if you're looking at testing between orthostatic positions, laying down, standing up, you may not get the same output. But if you're looking for a baseline level, then a SPECT scan can be really good. It's also really good to see you. It's been a while. I hope you're doing okay. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, so Alan's looking for a summary. So is there a cure? I think if you're willing to look at a cure as a return to function without symptoms, then I think that there is. That's my perspective and my opinion, and that's based on kind of what we talked about here. And then my caveat to that is it doesn't mean it's not without effort. It doesn't mean everybody will get there, but the pieces of it that I think are the most important are solving problems that aim at a useful target. So much of what we do in this field, in looking at POTS, most of the prescriptions are very generalized. And I think that my perspective is the more focused you can be on what one person's problem is, the better you're going to be able to solve that problem for that one person. And then when you get to the next person, guess what? You have to start all over again and solve that problem for the next person. When we do broad things, they can be generally decent for people, but it may not solve the problem all the way. So we may get some little kind of like foul balls or like get a piece of it, but we may not get the whole thing because it's too generalized for someone. So I'm advocating for people kind of seeking out to the best of their capacity, finding more information about the underlying mechanism of their symptoms so that they know how to tackle solving that underlying mechanism and putting as much weight behind that as they can to try to match that to the correct dose. Okay? And so that's kind of how I think about it. Those are the core features, is like knowing what problem to solve, having the underlying substrate to be able to solve it. Like some people may have had a catastrophic injury where we have a limitation of matter. Like if someone has had a bleed in their brain and it has destroyed that area of the brain, they may not be able to get that full function back. But for the people that have kind of a wide open path toward that, then it becomes a question of like hitting the correct dosage, working for capacity over time, and solving forward. So again, I wouldn't apply that to everyone, but that is like available for many, 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 many people out there. Okay. Okay. Holy mackerel, Ginia, where do I start here? Okay. I guess we'll start at the top. What I might have to do, golly, I'm so behind. Alan, I know exactly what you mean there. I'm glad to hear it. I feed AI every single day. I'm trying to feed it my whole brain and then have it then feed my brain to other people. So we'll see if that works. Okay. Let's see. So Ginia says, hold on, we're waiting for Virginia. Hey, thanks for hanging out with me. I know I have been on just a straight up monologue here, but I really appreciate you guys letting me do this. I do think it's, I hope it's valuable, but I want it to be in the library of what we talk about so we can keep like getting better and better at our questions. Evan's question says, does neurofeedback help? I know you want me to take this question, but does neurofeedback help what? Help POTS? Maybe. Neurofeedback is a tool that allows you to be able to use frontal control outputs. So it allows you to use your attentional system as a way to stimulate frontal outputs. So what do I mean by that? So we're measuring an EEG and we're saying if I can pay attention in the way that I think about, can I normalize that EEG? And if I do that, can that persist over time? So the question of whether or not that's going to help with POTS relies on the fact that is the problem in that ability of the frontal system to hold attention, is that the fundamental problem underneath it? Now, the fundamental problem that many people experience related to arousal can be because the frontal system is not able to effectively inhibit limbic outputs. So then the second part of that is saying like, well, we have to then assume that it is a limbic problem. So we have an escape of limbic activity that is therefore like the underlying problem for you. And for some people that can be true. We may see problems with relationships with the insula and cingulate cortex. We may see problems related to prefrontal output that's not inhibitory. So there's a lot of gray space there. So to say, does it help? I don't know. Can it help? Sure. It can help if it's solving a problem that is related to that system. If you're somebody that's got a whiplash injury and you're hypoperfusing to your brain because you've got a backup of flow through your neck, I don't think it's going to help much at all. But if you're someone who's dealing with a limbically related problem, you're working through that, and that helps you to be able to entrain that system to pull that down, then it may work magic. So again, it depends on solving that individual problem for you. Corey says, every day, when Corey writes, I try to look because he's a sharp guy and I like hearing what he's got to say. Every day I appreciate your approach more, Doc. Cure is such a difficult thing to define. Each cure is individual and working these pathways is vital for healing them. Improvement in POTS is possible for sure. And then I think you just keep going on improvement until you get to the place where you're like, man, I have a life I'm very thankful for. So cure is interesting because we kind of tie it to like instantaneous, miraculous improvement. And where the word cure comes from in Latin, I looked this up for this talk, so this isn't walking around knowledge for me. But where it comes from is the word for care and heal. So it's caring and healing. And that got kind of promulgated into the French nomenclature, and it is really the term for healing. So when people used to talk about cure, it was actually the intrinsic capacity within someone to heal themselves. And I think that is like, we should clip that because that is the important part, is all of the happening heals within you. You do it all. No one is doing it to you. You do it all. So you're setting yourself up for the best environment for your body to do the thing it knows how to do and heal. And sometimes that means changing the inputs, not just from chemistry that you're putting in your mouth or injecting in your arm. It's changing the inputs to your body so that they can start to regulate themselves and to be able to normalize that condition again. All right. All right, Virginia, where are we at here? Okay, so let's talk about one. Let's give you a real life example. So I'm going to just, who am I thinking of? Okay, so I've got one in my mind from that is, let's just call it recent. So it's a recent one. It's a youth case. And so the example is you have someone that has a profound cerebral hypoperfusion, right? Especially, Genius says whatever you want, ever, LOL. So if someone has, so she had a severe hypoperfusion. So we're talking about 40% drop upon being upright with significant hypocapnia, difficulty breathing, not difficulty breathing, difficulty being able to maintain CO2 levels, but also she had difficulty breathing. Okay. So in this particular case, we were able to understand that actually when you looked at it, highly intelligent person, actually very capable when you look at the, like a bedside neurological exam, like how well she moves, how well her eyes move, the orientation of her body, like all those things are really, really good. But what we do find, even in the vestibular system is actually really good too. Otolithic system works pretty well. But what we found was that there was a pretty profound loss of sensory acuity in the body, meaning when you touch, when you vibrate, when you prick different parts of her body, she doesn't interpret it very well. And as a consequence, it causes her to feel symptomatic, dizzy, nauseous, and very anxious, like very anxious. And again, more prevalent in youth. We don't have that full frontal lobe yet, so you're more likely to have a harder time inhibiting it. So in this case, we want to do things that help to improve that firing rate that goes, improving the signal from the body up to the brain. So we did things that amplify signals from the peripheral system. So we stimulate the nerves directly in this case. And by using that stimulation of the nerves directly, we can activate portions of the brain. With her capacity for neurovascular coupling was actually very high. So in those peripheral areas of the brain, it increases the blood flow into those areas. Now, doing that just like sitting up or standing is kind of hard because then it immediately will drop. So we did them laying down, and then we did it on a graded basis. So as she could start to feel it and normalize sensation in her body here, then we start to gradually bring it up. And we bring it up, and we bring it up. And then we get to about 45 degrees. And then we start working on these oscillations where we're starting to tie sensations of the body with sensations of head and eye movement so that we can couple that sensation of the body back to the head so that when she's coming upright, all of those precursor signals are coming in from the vestibular system and allow us to be able to push blood into the head, right? So it's pretty slick. Because that way, if I can push blood into my head using the vestibular system, then I know where I am when I stand up and everything doesn't drop to the floor again, which is pretty slick. And then we can get them up and moving. We move them with our good friend Keith Cronin from Neuro 20. We use that Neuro 20 suit as a way to provide a stimulus to the whole body, generally, the trunk and the upper limbs, while we start to generate that movement. So we amplify the signal from the body and start to move while upright. And then, so like in this particular case, we're localizing down to these areas in the somatosensory cortex where we're losing the signal from the body, and then we're trying to recapitulate those. Then we're going to have to figure out, then the second problem is like, how do you figure out how to get up? And that's kind of what I explained with doing it in a graded fashion. So rather than just getting people up and running, we say, well, to what degree can you tolerate it? And then we just keep going a little bit more, allowing her to be able to build that up. Okay? Cool. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to drop back here. All right. I hope you guys are having fun. Hope you're learning something. I really appreciate y'all being here. It's really, hopefully, helpful. I can see there's so many comments in here, and you guys, I think you guys are doing a really good job of helping each other out too. Yeah, I really appreciate you guys. Really, really do. Okay, so I'm gonna drop back and answer a couple of these to say. Okay, Kat had asked, my POTS seem to be triggered by hormones and histamine. Can you cure POTS without dealing with that? Great question. So I guess we're starting from a position right here that I think is really important. So the position that we're starting from is that hormones and histamine maybe are bad, right? So obviously I know what you mean by hormones is that like they are maybe not balanced, or they're not in the correct concentrations that we would typically expect them to be in. And then histamine, same thing. It's not in the correct concentration. Okay, so it's not the right amount. That's what we're saying. So normally histamine is like a normal part of life. We like it. It prevents stuff from being able to infect us in a way that kills us. So that's pretty sweet. Same thing with hormones, is when they're in balance, they let the whole system run and do some pretty magical things like build humans, which is pretty wild. But when they get out of concentration, then we can start to feel that. So then the question would be, why are they getting out of concentration? And obviously, it's a simple question, but it means everything, because if we're noticing this correlation where we're having an augmentation of hormonal outputs, like we're talking about sex hormones typically in this case, estrogen, testosterone, sex hormone binding globulin, progesterones, luteinizing hormone, PSH, like all these things, right? And then we start to couple that to like, oh, I've also got this altered output of a histamine response. And histamine is like, well, these are kind of released from, mast cells in different areas, and the area matters, right? And they're kind of being produced in bone marrow, which is a little different onset. So if I see this overlap of things, that's odd to me, because it's like, maybe those aren't exactly the same system, right? So why would they be having an overlap? And then you think about, well, where do the two things interface, or how do they control each other? Does having a problem in one lead to a problem in the other? Or do we see that there's a control system error that can lead to a problem in both? When you start thinking about chemical concentrations being out of order, I start to think a lot about feedback loops, meaning, am I able to detect the right amount and then act accordingly to be able to normalize it? And if not, then there's a feedback loop that I'm not executing well. And that might be a feedback loop in the chemistry, or in an organ, or in our brain's ability to generate it through the somatosensory cortex and the frontal cortex, or into the paraventricular nucleus, or into the hypothalamus writ large, relative to outputs to the pituitary, and to the thyroid, and to the adrenal glands, and to the testes, and to the ovaries, and all these things, right? So when I look at those, the first answer is like, can you cure POTS without dealing with that? I think inevitably you're dealing with all of it, because POTS is this symptom, just like these hormones and histamines. It's like it's showing you that there is an error. And so if we triangulate these things, where you're going to want to aim is figuring out, how are all these things related? Are they linked in a chain, like one causes the other? Or is there something else that is wrong that is causing all of these things as an output? And I think what you're asking is like, do I have to address each one of these things individually in order to solve the problem? My answer to that is, I don't know, but you could also consider that sometimes solving a completely different problem will be the thing that solves this problem, or solving one of these problems may help with the others. Or the least likely outcome is that you have three separate problems that are all happening at the same time that all need to be solved separately. So that's how I would think about it. And again, I know that's kind of a vague answer in some ways, but I think it's actually a more detailed answer, because thinking about it that way is going to be more useful than saying, like, what do I do for my hormones? And then going to somebody else to say, what do I do about POTS? And then somebody else to say, what do I do about histamine? Try to see where they all interface and solve the whole problem as a whole. So holism for the win. Okay. Yeah, so Dr. Ginny just made a note here, because I'll probably close up in about 10 minutes. I've been running like a madman this week. We've been having a lot of fun. We, doing shorts till 9:30 last night. Working with Chris, did some longs until I don't even know when, the night before, 9 o'clock or something. So it has been a busy week. But we will take these and we'll try to answer them at some point, either next week, or we'll try to do it in some shorts, or we'll do whatever we can. Okay? I won't leave you hanging. Okay. So Double B asks, can you give us some insights into how to weed out a neurologist who's interested in helping us as opposed to someone who just wants to medicate symptoms? Ooh, that's a tough one. Okay, so here's the starting point is it's hard. You can't really think in somebody else's brain. You only kind of get your own. So you don't really know what people are motivated or incentivized by. But the considerations might be that in terms of like, what is the underlying incentive? So is it set up so that as they're sitting in front of you, their incentive is to try all of the things at their disposal to be able to try to serve you in whatever way possible? And if you get lucky, you get in front of one of those people and you stay there. In other instances, the neurologist you may be in front of may have a different incentive. Their incentive might be, I have to see 50 people today, and I want to be done by 6 so that I can get home and see my kid's softball game. And I work in a hospital, which means that I'm bounded by what insurance will pay for. So really, your insurance is probably going to dictate what I do today. And so I have handcuffs. I don't have the whole world at my disposal in terms of what I can do. So I may be limited to things like, what can we do with this hospital system for you? And so if that's the case, you might get a different outcome because you have a different incentive. And in that case, if you're someone who the general strategies have not worked for you, then more of the same may not work. If that is all you have access to, then you're going to have to change your approach. I know that sucks, but that's just the way it is. And in that case, if you can't get in there and say like, okay, like I just want the whole world available to me, you're going to have to get them on your side and say something along the lines of like, here's what I'm looking for. Can you please help me with this and guide them? If you do it respectfully and you do it with grace, you can present people with some of these, different ideas or thoughts, or like give them some things to read gently. You can't throw it in their face and be like, this is what you should be doing, but give them things to think about and say like, hey, I was really thinking about this. I know you're really busy and you don't have a ton of time, but if you could look at this, it would mean the world to me and just help give me some guidance on maybe some other things I should consider. I've done all of these XYZ things and I'm still struggling. Maybe there's something along one of these different avenues that will help me out. And then you might get someone that can take a little breath, change their state a little bit, and think about the problem from a different angle. That might be useful. So that's what's available. You're probably going to have to do that is kind of like give them some suggestions without being overbearing, without making them feel defensive. And that might be your better bet if that's kind of where you're at in the scenario. Okay. Worth saying, I'm seeing from Munaya, it looks like. I guess my question was stupid and not worth an answer. Here's the deal. There's a lot of people asking questions and I'm trying to get to everyone. I'm doing this on my own time. All these people are here in their free time. If you respond like that, I probably won't take your question because it's petulant. Don't do that, okay? If you want to get it, we'll try to do our best, but that doesn't make me want to answer it. We just got finished talking about trying to get people on your side, not being petulant. That is like case in point of what not to do if you want somebody to do something for you to help you, okay? So be kind. Okay. All right. Ooh, wildfire, you asked, do I see more of a spectrum? I would like to know what that is. Because I think that's actually a good question. Oh, man. You guys are awesome. There's so many comments here, but also I don't know where I'm at. Okay, I'm going to have to bail on that one. Hopefully I answered it in the course of doing this. Mona, I know Mona went to go study But she said, why is it that I feel better living in San Diego? When I go back to Michigan, I feel weighed down, heavy, and super more tired. That's a really interesting one. Um, it might be worth kind of documenting some different things. So number one would be like, where are you living? What is the style of house? Like actual like environmental factors of where you're living, number one. And then number two, I would consider, if you're thinking it's more of like a weather or a pressure related pattern, then you could definitely start charting down barometric pressures, or you could ask AI to do it. Like, hey, I'm in San Diego. Can you tell me the atmospheric and stratospheric pressure changes over the last 6 months, and then correlate that to what it is in Michigan, and then correlate that to what you're seeing with symptoms, and that could kind of give you some inputs as well. That's a thing we don't talk a lot about here, but you may find that's true. And also, being from Michigan, you may find that like humidity is a little bit different, and being able to like affect breathing. And obviously I don't know what the symptoms are, but some starting places of things to think about. Dennis H. Oh, okay. Okay. Let's see. Let's try to do a couple more. Dennis H. asked a question here about heart rate going tachycardic under stress or excitement, diagnosed with inappropriate sinus tachycardia. Yeah, that's interesting. And then POTS later. But I think the stress of the test skewed my active stand test, and I don't think I POTS. That's actually really interesting, and that is a common occurrence. If you're already someone that you notice that arousal levels or activity levels will tend to jump you up, and you're already at a high threshold, and it'll do that, there's a likelihood that we would want to, like this is, Evan had asked about neurofeedback and these mechanisms of using your frontal outputs, that prefrontal cortex, as a way to be able to inhibit that limbic output, right? The normal kind of resting stance in a normal, like happy, healthy, functioning person is that as the frontal lobe is creating its output, it's also creating an inhibitory effect on the limbic system overall, which kind of like keeps that at bay, some of that like what we would consider like anxious energy at bay, and it allows us to be focused on whatever we're doing, and we're not like kind of like being steered by emotion as much. People that frontal system doesn't work as well, that limbic system will tend to kind of kick up and rise, and then we'll have bigger responses to smaller stimuli. And in that case, something like Evan was talking about, neurofeedback, something like that might be useful, or other ways to stimulate that frontal system so that we're reducing it. The other thing to consider, though, is sometimes that IST can be from a loss of the reflex of the outgoing vagal system, to where the heart's just kind of not inhibited. It's not being slowed down. And then that can start to affect things like your breathing, and that can affect your overall sense of arousal, so that you can you're actually like more prone to being responsive to things. You'll have the ability to create that anxiety with less threshold. So that's kind of two ways you can get to the same place, but from two completely different parts of the system. One is kind of from the top, and one is kind of from the bottom. And because of that, you'd want to treat them a little bit differently. So in this case, looking at deep breathing test and comparing the resilience of that system to what we might see in arousal systems. So like by doing things that are more like focally driven, like if you're paying attention, you're doing math, you're doing a task, does that actually pull it down, or does that raise it up? Or if we put you in like an uncomfortable position where we might ask you a lot of questions fast, or have you do things, and we want to see does it rise up? So then you are going to differentiate between, so in one sense like the reflexive system, and then the other, when you put an input in, does it help the system? Does it cool it down? or does it overwhelm the system and we see it crank up? And then you can start to piece that apart. So hopefully that's helpful. I think that might be helpful for a number of you in the room. So yeah. Okay, I'm gonna do one more. One more. Okay, this is a great question. Mathieson had asked, if we get treated for POTS and even recover fully, will we still always be more prone to getting POTS again later in life if we have HEDS, hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome? Really good question. I think that's one that's on a lot of people's minds. And again, I'm kind of giving like a broad answer here, and it may not fit everyone because how you get there is different. But the thing I would consider is if you recover fully and you're thinking about that in terms of like my function, when I measure these things, I actually work really well and I actually feel really well doing it. What you may notice is that most people, if we have HEDS, there may be things that you have to be careful of. You might not do as well, if you're in jiu-jitsu class and you're getting put in, an arm bar, you might have to be careful you don't tear a ligament in your arm, right? But also, a thing to consider is that most people, if they improve their function, they might get to a point where it's better than it ever was before, meaning they're actually way less susceptible than they ever were before. So that's also a probability as well. And then it's working on just like staying healthy and continuing to be strong. The more strength and resilience you have, the less likely you are to get sick. The more active you are, the easier it is to be able to stay more active. So I think for a lot of people, once they can kind of get over the hump, they generally tend to do well. Some people may be more responsive to it down the road, especially if we look at people that are sensitive or respondent to different types of illnesses as their immune system recovers from that. And there's some things we don't know in terms of different shots that people take or different infections that people have that may not be of the regular garden variety. There's some things we just don't know about yet, and I think you guys know what I'm talking about. But all we can do is just try to get as strong as you can, because any day, any of us is susceptible to any type of injury, but the stronger you are going into it, the more likely that you come out of it better, or you're more resilient to it in the moment. Okay? Cool. Okay. Whew. Okay, I'm going to put the rest of them on the list. I have them all on this list from, oh my goodness. So we're almost, it looks like 4 full pages now. We got to cross one off, so we're back down to 4. We're going to catalog these and we're going to try to get to them. And hopefully, maybe I can do it just sitting down and I can just go and we can post it, or we can do it in a live. I'll talk to Ginia and Chris and see what the best way is, but I want to make sure that we answer these questions for you guys. I won't let them go unseen. But again, that's kind of how it goes during the lives. I'm very thankful that everybody's here. Very thankful that you guys are asking a lot of questions, and they keep getting better every week, which is super cool. We've gone from having like a lot of like elementary questions and conversations as we're all trying to like wrap our heads around this, to now people are asking really impressive questions, and hopefully that's translating into better conversations for you guys with people that you care for and care for you, but then also recognize that there are other people that'll pick up and watch this later, and you guys are doing them a great service by helping them learn. So that's always on my mind, and I really appreciate you guys all being here. So in that spirit, I hope you have a great weekend. Hope you get to love your family, give somebody a hug, and